have you ever noticed something strange about Russian saints? Look through hundreds of Russian icons and you will find the same expression staring back at you. Calm, silent, almost completely unchanged. In Western Europe, saints were often painted preaching to crowds, defeating dragons, receiving visions, embracing the poor, resisting temptation and triumphing over evil. Some smiled, many did not, but almost all were shown within a particular story. A saint could appear heroic, victorious, radiant, even larger than life. The artist wanted us to witness a moment. Russian icon painters wanted us to encounter something beyond moments. Today we usually think of religious art as something that records a sacred event. A painting shows us what happened. A portrait shows us what somebody looked like. Russian icon painters understood their task differently. An icon was not meant to preserve a passing expression. A smile appears and disappears. Joy rises and falls. Even triumph eventually fades. What interested them was something more permanent. The human person transformed by divine grace. The saint after every earthly struggle had ended. The saint as eternity sees them. Everything in the icon is directing our attention toward permanence rather than movement. The icon is not asking us to admire the saint. It is asking us to follow where the saint is looking. Few figures reveal this better than Saint Sergius of Radonej. When people think of greatness, they usually imagine action. Kings lead armies, politicians shape nations, and explorers cross oceans. Yet one of the most influential figures in Russian history spent much of his life in a forest, seeking silence. Sergius withdrew from the world not because he despised it, but because he believed that beneath the noise of everyday life, there existed a deeper reality that could only be encountered in stillness. Over time, people traveled vast distances to seek his advice. Princes consulted him. Monasteries were founded under his influence, and his reputation spread throughout Russia. Yet when we look at the icons of Saint Sergius, something curious happens. The painter seems almost uninterested in the achievements that made him famous. There are no dramatic political encounters, no displays of influence, no attempts to capture his historical importance. Instead, we are presented with a face marked by calm attention. This reflects a conviction that runs through much of Russian spirituality. What mattered most about Sergius was not what he accomplished. It was what he became. The icon, therefore, does not celebrate his influence. It points toward the stillness from which that influence emerged. The first lesson of Russian iconography is that holiness is not always found in activity. Sometimes it is found in stillness. But stillness alone cannot explain everything, because some Russian saints were known not for silence but for extraordinary joy. And that brings us to Saint Seraphim of Sarov. If any Russian saint should have been painted smiling, it was Saint Seraphim. Those who met him described a man overflowing with joy. His famous greeting was simple: "My joy, Christ is risen." Again and again, visitors spoke of his warmth, kindness, and love. Yet the icon remains remarkably restrained. At first glance, this seems contradictory. How can a tradition famous for solemn faces produce a saint remembered for joy? The answer reveals something important about how Russian spirituality understood the human person. Modern culture often treats joy as an emotion, something we feel, something that appears on the face, something that rises and falls with circumstances. The icon tradition understood joy differently. Joy was not merely a feeling. It was the fruit of a transformed soul. For this reason, the painter was not trying to capture a passing emotional state. He was trying to reveal the source from which joy emerged. The icon does not ask whether Seraphim happened to be smiling at a particular moment. Instead, it asks, What happens to a human being when they draw close to God? At this point, the mystery begins to make sense. The icon is not trying to capture a saint's mood, it is trying to reveal a saint's transformation. And no Russian saint explored that transformation more deeply than Saint Nilus of Sora. Nilus spent much of his life asking a question that feels surprisingly modern. How does a person remain attentive in a world full of distractions? Long before smartphones and endless streams of information, Nilus understood how easily the human mind becomes fragmented. Our thoughts wander. Our attention is pulled in countless directions. We become so occupied with what is immediate that we lose sight of what is important. For Nilus, silence was not an absence of activity. It was a discipline of attention. Solitude mattered because it stripped away distractions and forced a person to confront reality honestly. Seen through this lens, the faces in Russian icons begin to look very different. The saints are not passive, they're attentive. Their calmness is not emotional emptiness, it is spiritual presence. By the time we reach St. Nilus, the mystery of the Russian icon begins to resolve itself. Sergius teaches stillness, Seraphim teaches joy, Nilus teaches attention. Together they reveal why Russian saints rarely smile. Today we live in a world obsessed with visibility. Everything must be expressed, everything must be shared, everything must be noticed. Russian icons quietly propose another possibility, that a human life may possess great depth without demanding attention. That peace may be more valuable than excitement. That stillness may reveal truths hidden by noise. This is why Russian saints rarely smile, not because they lacked joy, not because they rejected human emotion, and not because Russian artists forgot how to paint personality. A smile belongs to a moment. Holiness belongs to a lifetime. The icon sought to look beyond the moment, beyond the story, beyond even the saint himself, toward the eternal reality that the saint spent his life pursuing. Perhaps that is why these faces remain so calm. They are not inviting us to admire them. They are inviting us to become still enough to see what they saw. And perhaps that is the strangest thing about Russian saints. The more you look at them, the less they seem concerned with themselves. Their gaze is always directed beyond the viewer, beyond the painting, beyond the world.